I can still picture it perfectly, that thin strip of golden light seeping under my girlfriend Leah's bedroom door. It was supposed to be a normal weekend. Leah's parents had gone on a 3-day trip to celebrate their anniversary, and naturally she'd invited me to stay over. Her parents were usually strict about overnight visits, but with them gone we figured no harm done. Leah lives in one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where every house looks identical to the next. By 10 p.m. the entire area feels deserted. The silence always unsettles me when I leave late at night, so I was relieved to be staying put for once. We had a typical evening. Takeout, Netflix, the usual. Leah's bedroom is on the second floor overlooking the backyard, which borders a dense line of trees. With minimal outdoor lighting, the forest at night is just an impenetrable wall of darkness. Around midnight we turned off the TV and drifted to sleep. I don't remember falling asleep, but what followed was one of the most disturbing dreams I've ever experienced. In my dream, I jolted awake to the sound of a door slamming shut downstairs. Before I could process what was happening, heavy footsteps raced up the stairs. I shot up in bed, ready to confront whoever had broken in, but something stopped me. The room looked exactly as it had when we'd fallen asleep. Every detail perfectly preserved, except for one thing. A thin strip of yellow light was visible beneath the bedroom door. Something about that light paralyzed me. My vision tunneled until all I could see was that glowing line. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and moved toward the door, then suddenly stopped. Then the whispering started. At first it was a single voice, a man's voice, saying terrible things about me, criticizing my appearance, my personality, my future. But then it got disturbingly personal. The voice knew things about me, deeply private things I'd never shared with anyone, not even Leah. It recounted specific moments from my past, mistakes I'd made, thoughts I'd had. One voice became 2, then 3, until it sounded like a crowd was gathered outside the door, all of them tormenting me with my darkest secrets. It felt like my mind was being invaded, my most private thoughts exposed and mocked. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, rushed to the door and yanked it open, only for every light in the house to instantly go out. The voices stopped and the air turned freezing cold. For a moment, I felt like I'd stepped into another dimension. Disoriented, I stumbled back to bed and hid under the covers. Then I woke up, or thought I did. I sat up slowly, trying to calm myself, but when I looked at the door, that same strip of light was still there. The nightmare repeated itself. The slamming door downstairs, the footsteps, the voices. Again, I raced to the door and flung it open, only to encounter that same cold darkness. When I finally woke up for real, my heart was pounding. Leah was still fast asleep beside me, which reassured me that I was actually awake this time. In my dream, I'd never thought to check if she was there. But when I looked at the bedroom door, my blood ran cold. That same strip of light was visible beneath the door. The exact same image from my dream. It made no sense. Every light in the house should have been off. Then I heard it, footsteps downstairs, clear as day. Someone was inside the house. I immediately grabbed my phone and silently called the police. After telling them what was happening, I tiptoed to the door to make sure it was locked, then crept back to Leah and gently woke her up, covering her mouth so she wouldn't make noise. The wait felt endless, but finally we heard the police arrive. There was shouting downstairs, and when I eventually went down, I saw 2 masked men being led away in handcuffs. Leah's parents rushed home once they heard what happened. They were just grateful I had been there, not angry about me staying over. A week later, Leah called with more information. The police told her parents that the intruders had seen a social media post about the family trip and thought no one would be home. The break-in doesn't bother me much anymore. What I can't shake is the dream itself. How could I have dreamed about that light under the door before it happened? Leah thinks I have unresolved issues in my subconscious, but that doesn't explain it. That strip of light is permanently etched in my mind now. I can see it even when I'm awake. I'm hoping it will eventually fade, but part of me fears it's there forever. A constant reminder that sometimes our dreams know things we don't. Most nights, I fall asleep to some kind of background noise. Could be a podcast about astronomy, a chess tutorial, or just the sound of rainfall. I'm an active dreamer, so whatever I listen to usually finds its way into my dreams somehow. Chess videos lead to dreams about playing chess. Podcasts about space lead to dreams about floating among the stars. You get the idea. This technique has another benefit. It prevents nightmares, which plagued me throughout childhood. With guided dreams, I rarely experience anything truly frightening anymore. That changed during a sleepover at my friend Max's house a few weeks ago. There were 3 of us, me, Max, and Ethan. Max's parents were away for the weekend, which was why we were having the sleepover in the first place. His living room has several large, comfortable couches where we all decided to sleep. Without my usual sleep soundtrack, I knew my dreams would be less predictable that night. Still, I wasn't worried. It had been years since I'd had a truly disturbing nightmare. I fell asleep easily enough. What followed was one of the most vivid dreams I've experienced in years. I was alone on a small sailboat in the middle of the ocean. Strange, since I've never been on a sailboat in my life. The water was rough, and the sky had this peculiar color, a mix of charcoal gray and deep violet. The wind was howling, but not in a frightening way. It felt cinematic, like I was in an adventure film. Suddenly, the boat lurched violently. I couldn't see what we'd hit, but I felt the impact reverberate through the vessel. Something had cracked below the waterline, and water began rushing in through the hull. I tried desperately to plug the hole with my jacket, but it was useless. The boat was sinking rapidly. Panic overwhelmed me as the water rose around my legs. Just as the boat began to tip sideways, something incredible happened. A dolphin leaped out of the churning water, locked eyes with me, and spoke in perfect English, "Wake up now." I jolted awake instantly. Unlike my usual groggy post-sleep state, I was fully alert, though initially confused about why. I looked around the darkened living room. My friends were still sleeping peacefully nearby, and everything appeared normal. But as my mind cleared, I noticed something odd. A faint rushing sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't the muffled drip of a leaky faucet. This was consistent, like running water. That must have been what triggered my dream about the ocean. I sat there for a moment, listening intently. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I crept up the stairs as quietly as possible, the sound growing louder with each step. It was definitely running water, coming from the bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and even from a distance I could see one of the sink knobs was turned all the way, water gushing out at full force. There was no way that could have happened by itself. I approached the bathroom cautiously. Just as I reached for the door, something made me pause. The bathroom was large, with a lengthy counter, a shower behind a curtain, and a toilet tucked away in a corner. Plenty of places for someone to hide. A chill ran through me. I couldn't bring myself to enter. Instead, I backed away and rushed downstairs to wake Max. I shook him urgently, telling him something was wrong. Though initially groggy, he quickly sensed my fear and asked what was happening. I explained about the running water upstairs and my suspicion that someone was in the house. That woke him fully. Leaving Ethan asleep on the couch, we crept back upstairs together. When we reached the bathroom door, Max didn't hesitate. He pushed it open and stepped inside. What happened next is still a blur. A figure lunged from behind the door and tackled Max, knocking him to the ground. The attacker was wielding what looked like a metal pipe, ready to strike. Without thinking, I threw myself at the intruder, trying to pull him off my friend. Max and I grappled with the man, but he was much stronger than both of us. After a chaotic struggle, he broke free, shoved us aside, and sprinted down the stairs. By the time we made it to the front door, he had vanished into the night. The police arrived about half an hour later but weren't particularly helpful. They determined that the intruder had entered through an unlocked window downstairs. With no security cameras in the house, we had no evidence to provide. The police suggested it was probably a random burglary attempt, but were convinced it was something more targeted. Why would a burglar deliberately create noise by turning on a faucet? It was clearly a trap to lure someone upstairs. But for what purpose? Max believes the intruder knew his parents were away and expected him to be alone that night. If that's true, then whoever broke in likely intended to seriously harm or even kill him. I often wonder what would have happened if I had entered that bathroom alone. Would I have been attacked? Would I have even survived? The thought haunts me, but I'm also left wondering about that dream. How a dolphin told me to wake up at precisely the moment I needed to. Was it just my subconscious processing the sound of running water, or was it something more? I don't know if I'll ever have an answer. What I do know is that I now sleep with my bedroom door locked, and I've never been more grateful for a dream in my life. This happened over a span of about 4 years when I was young, maybe 9 to 13. I started having this recurring dream, more like a half-lucid nightmare, approximately once every 3 months. It always began the same way. I'd find myself lying in bed, but the perspective was wrong. Instead of seeing things from my own viewpoint, I was looking down at myself from the ceiling, as if watching through a security camera. This out-of-body sensation was deeply unsettling. I'd tried to move back toward my body, but could only turn my head to look around the room. Being partially lucid, I recognized I was dreaming, but that didn't diminish my fear. After calming myself, I'd begin noticing strange details about my bedroom. The digital clock on my nightstand would be counting backward. That was usually the first odd thing I'd spot. Once I noticed that, other peculiarities would reveal themselves. There were crayon drawings taped to my walls and furniture. Childish sketches I had no memory of creating. I wasn't particularly artistic as a child, so these weren't forgotten masterpieces. They always depicted the same scene. A row of smiling people holding hands with one smaller figure, presumably me, standing in front of a house with a red roof. Another constant was an old toy train that appeared in different locations around my room, significant because I had lost that exact toy years earlier. After taking in these details, I'd feel an irresistible urge to look toward my window. As if on cue, a man would appear just outside the glass. He had thinning gray hair and a distinctive scar on his right temple. That's all I can recall about his appearance. He would watch me sleep for several seconds, then begin clawing at the window like he was trying to get in. That's when I'd wake up, sometimes immediately checking the window, sometimes too frightened to move. But I never found any evidence of his presence. No handprints, no scratches, nothing. After the fourth occurrence, I finally told my parents. My mother said recurring dreams weren't unusual, especially for children my age. My father was more practical, assuring me they were just down the hall if I ever felt scared. Seeing I was still anxious, he took me outside to inspect the area beneath my window. There were no footprints or any sign that someone had been there. Their reassurance helped a little, but not completely. Still, after that fourth dream, they suddenly stopped. I went nearly 6 months without an episode, and gradually, the fear faded into the background like most childhood anxieties do when life returns to normal. Then it came back. One random night, the dream returned in exact detail. The backwards clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But something was different this time, something even more terrifying than before. It took me a moment to realize what had changed. My bedroom window was open. I jolted awake immediately but couldn't move. Complete sleep paralysis gripped me for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes. My mind screamed at me to check the window, convinced it was wide open, letting in the cold night air, and possibly the man from my dreams. but my body remained frozen. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I rushed to the window and found it securely locked. I couldn't sleep for the remainder of that night. More months passed. I began mentally preparing myself before bed each night, thinking about the dream in detail to brace myself for its return. Surprisingly, this strategy worked. The next time I had the dream, I was significantly less frightened. By the time it occurred again, I barely reacted at all. Still, something about it bothered me enough to mention it to my parents again. Perhaps because I was older or described it more vividly, they seemed to pay closer attention this time. When I mentioned the scar on the man's temple, their demeanor changed subtly but noticeably. My father interrupted, asking if I was certain about the scar. When I confirmed I was, my parents exchanged a look that suggested they knew something I didn't. A few days later, they sat me down for a conversation. My mother explained that when I was very young, too young to remember, there was a man named Thomas who occasionally looked after me. They always referred to him as Uncle Thomas, though he wasn't actually related to us, just a close friend of my mother's from college. Apparently, he was around frequently when I was an infant and toddler, especially when both my parents were working. But something happened. My mother didn't elaborate, just said there was a serious incident that led them to completely cut ties with him. My father had explicitly forbidden Thomas from ever contacting our family again, especially me. The only other detail they shared, and this gave me chills, was that Thomas had a prominent scar on his temple from a motorcycle accident years before I was born. They didn't explicitly connect this to my dreams, but they didn't need to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mother had gone to bed, my father lingered in my room. He seemed to want to say more about the situation. After a moment of hesitation, he shared his theory. He believed the dreams were my mind's way of processing deeply buried memories from when I was too young to form coherent recollections. He mentioned how attached I'd apparently been to Thomas, how I'd cry when he left and always wanted him to read me bedtime stories. My father couldn't explain how I'd know about the scar if I had no conscious memories of Thomas. I didn't know what to make of it either, as I still couldn't recall a single moment with this person. The frequency of the dreams decreased after that conversation. I experienced it only once or twice over the next year. But things took a disturbing turn sometime in the fourth year. One night, after waking from the dream, I habitually glanced at my window and saw something move outside. It wasn't my imagination. Something had definitely shifted in the darkness beyond the glass. All the fear I'd spent years suppressing came rushing back. I screamed for my parents, who responded immediately. My father ran outside in his pajamas while my mother held me tightly. When my father returned, he whispered something to my mother and they called the police, though I don't recall hearing any sirens that night. The next day, my father admitted he'd found what appeared to be faint footprints beneath my window. When I asked if it could have been Thomas, he said that was impossible. We had moved and Thomas had no way of knowing where we lived. My father promised nothing bad would ever happen to me, and he was right. I never had that dream again. My parents rarely discuss the incident, and I've stopped asking about it. What bothers me most is the possibility that every time I had that dream, someone was actually outside my window watching me. Could someone have been stalking me periodically for 4 years? It seems unlikely, yet the footprints my father found suggest otherwise. I'm still not sure what's more disturbing: the idea that it was Thomas somehow finding me, or just a random stranger that my mind associated with him. And I still can't explain how these events translated into my dreams. One thing I know for certain: my parents never actually called the police that night. That's something I will likely never understand. I've researched dream phenomena extensively since then, but found no satisfactory explanation. Perhaps some mysteries are better left unsolved. But even now, years later, I sometimes find myself glancing at my bedroom window before sleep, half expecting to see a face with a scarred temple looking back at me.